Okay, so I wasn't sure if I was gonna do this, but Apple Intelligence dropped today, and this is my main production of phone. And so I installed the beta because this is the only thing I basically have right now that I'm willing to install a beta on that could potentially run the Apple Intelligence beta. And we'll see if we're gonna get it here. Kind of uneventful.
The holy grail of consumer AI right now is a conversational virtual assistant that can actually take actions for you.
So unfortunately, no luck installing iOS 18.1 Beta 1 with Apple Intelligence. I decided I was going to install it on my production phone, which I promised myself I wouldn't do at the beginning of the summer unless the features were compelling enough. And so I installed it this morning because the features seemed like they were compelling enough. But whenever I click on the waitlist, which other people seem to have no issues with, it just kicks me back out to the main screen. It doesn't let me actually sign up. It might be because my developer account is different from my actual main account on my device. But, you know, a beta is going to beta, and that's just how things roll sometimes. But anyway, there are plenty of other people who have covered the actual things that are present in this first version of Apple Intelligence, and I really highly recommend that you go watch them. There are plenty of other people who talk about that. Here, I'm going to talk more about the structure of Apple Intelligence, what it means for the future of this as a platform for Apple, and what those features that have been released in iOS 18.1, Beta 1, represent for the future of the platform and the developers that are going to be making things for it. So starting out with our categories for the things that I believe make up Apple Intelligence. First of all, Apple has been using machine learning in their devices for a long time. They've even been building machine learning hardware into their devices for, I think it's been at least the last 5 years, if not more. And the point is that what they are branding as Apple Intelligence is different from what they've called machine learning in the past, even though those technologies are really pretty much the same thing for the most part. Apple Intelligence is Apple's way of talking about the generative features of their phones. Instead of things that are like recommendation algorithms or things like the math notes, for example, on the new iPad OS, Apple Intelligence is the thing that is going to be able to have a broader set of multimodal inputs, including voice and text, and a broader set of outputs that are generated by the computer that may not have otherwise been created. In some ways, what this means is that instead of always starting with a narrow UI and a narrow set of outputs, you actually have a much broader user interface and a much broader set of outputs that you're offered. Now, Apple groups this into kind of 3 categories of features. The first one is writing and communication features, or written communication is one way to think about it. The second one is image-based features, and the last one is Siri. I'm going to address the first 2 first, writing and images, because Siri is kind of its own beast, and I think it's the most interesting to discuss. That said, the other 2 are pretty important. So, in this first version, first of all, I'd like to get it out of the way. Most of the image features are not present. In fact, they're kind of notably not present for the most part. The things that they've said they will release are Notes app image wand is what they call it. It's the image wand, which basically lets you take a sketch in the Notes app and turn it into a generative image. The second one is Image Playground, which has the same underlying technology. It lets you enter a prompt with some graphical user interface, lets you generate images in certain styles, and then it kind of gives it back to you in the same way that you might do something like DALL-E or Midjourney, for example, if you use other generative image platforms in the past. And then the last one is sort of like Genmoji, which is supposed to be like a fun, very narrow application of their image models on their devices. It's supposed to basically generate I don't know, a dinosaur surfing, or a pink heart is a classic one that people always ask for. It's basically a way for them to plug the holes that that emoji and the Unicode standard don't currently cover. All sort of fun applications. I would say none of which are particularly revolutionary or even groundbreaking. In some cases, they're actually more, they're trailing a lot of the industry and a lot of their generative capabilities. The one interesting thing in the image category, I think, that is probably going to get used more than most of the other ones are the Photos app features, which are memory movies, a cleanup tool, and better search, basically. The memory movie is a way of describing something that you want out of your library and allowing your phone to generate a movie version of it. There's also the cleanup tool, which lets you kind of circle certain things that you want erased. This has been a feature that's been present in Google's Pixel line for a very long time. And better search. This search is better in a couple of ways, but the first one is that generative AI is very good at understanding what a person means when they ask for something. And so kind of a more semantic search within the photo library that you have is now possible using those generative AI features. And so that's kind of the foundation of this new search within the Photos app. Really importantly, though, there's also the ability to search for clips within videos, actually, that have certain moments that happen later on. So, for example, if I'm filming a coffee cup at the beginning, and later on I find, I don't know, a bouquet of flowers, and I search like bouquet, even though maybe like the first few frames are of that coffee cup, it will search throughout all the frames in that video and go to the end and pull out that clip where I'm taking the actual bouquet, which is what I was looking for. The only things that shipped in this first version are the memory movie and that special search. All of the other things, like the cleanup tool, the image wand, the image playground, and the Genmoji, don't seem like they've come in this first beta. Also, just my own opinion about it, it's kind of the least interesting part of it, and ultimately, I think that the kind of generative images that it's creating are sort of creepy and weird. The second thing is the writing and communication tools. Now, what's really interesting is that while the image part of this has mostly not been shipped yet, almost all of these features have been. So listen to me as I kind of go down the list. The first portion of it is a new writing tool that lets you highlight text and do things like create summaries, extract key points, create tables, lists, and change the tone of something, like make it happy or more professional, for example. That's shipped. And people have had decent results from what I've seen in the early testing of it so far on things like Threads, for example. The second set of features I call kind of prioritization features. This is the set of Apple Intelligence features that has a focus on like notifications and mail and things like that. These are things that are trying to understand the content of something that you've received. Some type of message, like a notification that an app sends, a text message that you receive, a mail message that you receive, and allows the generative AI to basically say, this is something that rises to the level of something that's important or doesn't, basically. And that allows you to do a couple of things with that. The first one is that it allows you to have a focus mode or a like do not disturb mode on your phone that kind of intelligently tries to surface notifications to you that it thinks is important and silences notifications that it thinks are not important. The second thing that that does is it allows you to put the most important, for example, like email messages at the top of your inbox, or allows you to summarize the most important notifications that you're getting from your email, or even something like iMessage, and sort of surface those to the top while letting other things fall to the bottom. Those things have shipped. And the last thing is the recording transcription that lets you use voice memos, for example, and now actually allows you to record in the phone app and does things like summarize a meeting call, or summarizes a phone call that you have, or summarizes a lecture that you might be listening to, or transcribes it and lets you extract some of that text for some other purpose. That has also shipped. The only thing that hasn't really shipped in terms of the writing tools is, at least as far as I know, the Smart Reply feature in Apple's Mail app. That is the feature that basically turns a set of questions in an email to a form that you can fill out using a graphical user interface, and then intelligently generates a reply using your responses to that form. Kind of the least interesting of the group, although kind of interesting technology as far as things go. So almost none of the image features have shipped, and ultimately, in my opinion, I don't really care about them because they're sort of behind the curve. And almost all of the writing features have shipped, which I deeply care about because I think that they're going to be used very often. I think it's interesting that they're on device. I think they're on par with the industry standard, although I haven't gotten to test them myself. And I think that importantly, I mean, a hobby horse of mine is the importance of prioritizing notifications. It's something that will be very accessible generative AI features for a large swath of the public that they will hopefully see a very direct benefit from in terms of notification overload. The last set of features that the last set of Apple Intelligence features are Siri features. And this one is much more of a mixed bag in terms of what has shipped here in the first beta of Apple Intelligence. I'm going to go through all of the features, and the first half will be ones that have shipped, and the second half will be ones that haven't. Here's the first half. Siri features start with a richer understanding of what it is that you're actually asking for. This is sort of like the hallmark feature of these large language models and generative AI. LLMs are great at understanding what people mean. They are better at understanding the semantics of a rambling sentence than previous other natural language processing techniques that we've invented. And so Siri now will be able to understand when you say something like, oh, can you please start a timer for, actually, sorry, I mean actually an alarm set for 3 p.m. Notice how in the past, any type of intelligent assistant, but especially Siri, might have had some issues with trying to understand what you were saying there, because you started to ask for one thing and then asked for another. It will be better at parsing them down. Of course, can't be perfect. All language is kind of fuzzy and mushy. But this meets language's fuzziness and mushiness and humans' inability to perfectly articulate what they mean at all times like a computer, and gives computers a much better chance at doing it. And so, first and foremost, this has shipped that now you can sort of ramble along and Siri will do a much better job at trying to understand you rather than trying to get you to fit into these narrow sort of text adventure holes that they have set up as Apple. In relation to that, the second feature that they've shipped is this context, this session-based contextual awareness. So if I ask, what's the weather in Seattle? You would understand that I'm asking about Seattle and that you want the weather. So you'd go and you'd Google it, right? And then if I asked you, oh, what about the humidity? You wouldn't necessarily give me the humidity of Arizona if I was in Arizona. Because we were in the context of that conversation, you'd understand that I was still asking about Seattle, and you'd give me the information about Seattle. Siri will do the same thing here. It will understand a piece of context the same way that you might use ChatGPT, for example, and use it to kind of iterate back and forth and have a real conversation rather than something that feels like a transactional call and response. That has also shipped. The second piece of that is actually product knowledge. I think this is something that people have sung its praises, and I think it's another great example of what an LLM is good at. You see, something like product knowledge is something that you can semantically understand from a language perspective, right? And so if I'm a user and I want to know how to erase all of the settings on my phone, I can now ask Siri sort of some general question like, how do I wipe my phone clean? Notice that it didn't use the right language there. And you might go to Google, for example, to find that information. But because all of that is documented, and Apple has really robust documentation, it allows a large language model to go and say, oh, they asked for this thing. I think they kind of mean this thing, and then pull that relevant information to the front. I think of someone like the less tech-savvy members of my family. having a lot of benefit from that, knowing that they can ask their device how to use it and the device can respond for them. I think it's going to be a really popular feature once it catches on. That is also shipped. The next thing is design. Now, there's a couple of things here that they've done. The first one is sort of, I mean, they're both sort of surface level. One of them is sort of a user experience thing, but Apple has made a really pretty animation, basically. I think Apple loves to do this. They love to change the fashion of their products when it represents a real foundational change. And the way that they have lit up the edge of the phone when you ask Siri to do something represents that Siri has an understanding of what's going on your phone rather than being a little bubble that kind of appears from nowhere. It's a very Apple-y thing. I think it's very cute. I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about its actual design. I think it's a little kitschy looking, but I think that the idea behind it is solid and it's a great place to iterate from and will be a hallmark of Siri going forward. The second piece of that is the more user experience thing, which is that you don't always want to talk to your device. And so a double tap on the home indicator at the bottom of your screen will pop up effectively a chat prompt for you to chat with Siri the same way you might with ChatGPT. Both of those things have shipped as well. Of those kind of like 3 big categories and 5 or so features that have shipped when it comes to Siri, they're on the easier side of things to implement. They pretty much are raw LLM capabilities that are good on their own. And in fact, looking back at things like the writing features, the priority notifications and things like that, the message transcription, and the photo search, these are all things that these technologies don't require a lot of additional building on top of by Apple in order to be good products on their own. So it makes sense that they're shipping early here. Now, this is where we get into the back half of Siri, where there's 2 major items that are deeply intertwined, and the thing that is supposed to distinguish Apple Intelligence from all of its competitors because of Apple's position in the ecosystem and their history of user experience and design and user interface design in personal products for the general public. Here's what it is. What they call this when it comes to Siri is personal context. And the other thing that they call it is on-screen awareness. I think they use another term too, talking about how it allows you to work with Siri in and across applications. And this is the part that is the most ambitious piece of this Apple Intelligence thing that Apple has launched. And it is the biggest question mark to see just how good Apple's chops are when it comes to the technical use of these large language models. Here's why. When it comes to personal context, this is a new way of understanding what files and apps and content is on your phone at any given point in time. There is a long history of this, right? Back in the day when things were on a command line, that may have come in the form of something like a file, right? Or a directory structure or a directory path. You maybe thought of it as walking down a series of hallways and getting to the right thing that you wanted to. When the Mac was shipped, that pivoted from a directory structure to a file-based structure, right? The content on your device was always a file, and they were stored within these folders. There were these physical analogs for things that you might have in a space like this that is organized in some way and is the way that an office, for example, might organize things. This was a really useful metaphor for a really long time when it came to the graphical user interface, right? Because people understood what an office kind of looked like, they could kind of understand what the computer was trying to do for them. A file was something that they understood, or in the case of a Mac, it was, you could call it a document, and it would be really understandable. It's like a piece of paper in a way, a magical piece of paper. Folders were totally understandable. I always organize my documents within a folder in the real world and put them into a filing cabinet. So that totally makes sense. And applications were like these little pieces of equipment around the office that you could use. There was a trash can. You might have had a word processor, which was like a typewriter, right? You might have had, when it came to the Mac, something like an image creator or something, an image viewer and things like that. And so all of these things were familiar and allowed users to understand it because the computer presented it to them graphically. Now, it's important to remember There were some technical changes that happened around that, but that actually was really just adding a thin layer on top of the actual computer to help humans understand what the computer was trying to achieve. It was using a lot of the processing power that was coming into being during that period of the Macintosh and using it to better fold the computer's display of these concepts to the users who were probably entering into the personal computer space without a lot of experience using the personal computer. Go forward many years through the mobile paradigm, which changed from a focus on files to a focus on apps, and into the era of Siri, and now into the area of Siri powered by Apple Intelligence. And this is the ultimate expression of that. What personal context does is it allows your computer to have some understanding of how you think about things. That is, the computer has some understanding of what is actually going on in the content that you want. And take this with a grain of salt because it's not a perfect technical description, but it sort of stores those things next to each other, right? So for example, a Mac and an iPhone and an Apple Watch and an image of that and my writings about that might all be kind of close together in the way that the iPhone thinks and the way that Apple Intelligence thinks about how I have my files on my device. Then I might have another set of things that are like an image of a banana and an image of an apple, right? And my writings about an apple. And those things might be in a grouping that's away from my writings about my tech devices, right? But the apple, the fruit, and Apple, the company, may be closer together. It's kind of like, it's probably a better example. It's kind of like you might see something in a room like this, where an artist maybe is storing things in piles and groups that are sort of loosely related to one another in order to kind of spur some understanding of, oh, I need to go over to my paints, and maybe there's some sections that are highly organized and some that are a little more like a grab bin of related things just because nothing fits into perfect categories. Apple Intelligence and personal context are trying to do that. They're trying to take what is on your phone, all of the files, all of the data, all of the photos, all of the messages and the contacts and the applications and the functions of the device, and organize them so that you can speak to your phone in the way that you understand, and the phone actually has an understanding of what you mean by that. That's what's special about semantic indexes. That's what's special about personal context. And it's also what's special about the on-screen awareness. If it can do all of those things for all of the files on your phone, it can also do that for what's on your screen. Now, where things get interesting is when these silos of applications start to work together, right? The model on the iPhone is that each app is like a toolbox. It's got a set of things that you want to do in it. Maybe you want to view a photo. Maybe you want to edit a photo, right? You probably know which app to go to on your phone when I tell you to do that. Maybe you want to send a message to someone who has an iPhone. Maybe you want to send a message to someone who doesn't have an iPhone. Maybe you want to send a message to your great aunt who only uses Facebook. You probably know where to go for each of those in terms of the apps that you need to pull up for each of those tasks that you need to do. Your phone doesn't really. It requires you to operate it. The promise of this part of Apple Intelligence when it comes to on-screen awareness, when it comes to personal context, and when it comes to working in and across applications is the promise that the functions of your phone, the content on your phone, and your requirements, the thing that you ask for when you talk to Siri, all can finally come together because your phone finally has an understanding of what you mean when you ask for it. You can see that I'm excited about this. And I think that it's sort of the ultimate dream of what you want these devices to do. It's why I've critiqued things like the Rabbit R1 and the Humane AI Pen in the past. Those are platforms that didn't have the benefit of that personal context and a robust developer ecosystem that allows them to pull those things together and meet in the middle and use the magic of something like a large language model to bridge the gaps that were previously not possible before. It is Apple's unique competitive advantage because they have so many devices in people's hands that in the most personal of ways across this country and across the world. it's also telling that they haven't shipped that yet, because it's also a hard problem to solve. We've seen these companies try it, and yes, fail because they don't have that advantage, but also fail because it's a hard problem, right? We don't know whether that's actually possible because this is the true cutting edge of this technology. It's Apple's biggest promise and is the thing that they've staked their reputation on by putting the name Apple in Apple Intelligence. It should just work, as they've said in the past. And also, to use the tagline that they've used for it, it should be AI for the rest of us, because it should be something that you don't have to think about. I give them the benefit of the doubt. We're in a beta cycle. But I will say that Mark Gurman has reported that these Apple Intelligence features are going to kind of leak as drops into the coming months and actually beyond the initial release, which is already now slipped to October, into the beginning in the first quarter of 2025, which is next year, right? And so what that means is that Apple has taken off a big bite here. They announced a platform very early, and we don't know how successful it's actually going to be necessarily. The best comparison, first of all, I'm going to pause there. This is a unique thing for Apple. Apple rarely does this, where they pre-announce something so ambitious before the technology is ready and before they really have a clear path forward towards that technology, right? The best example that I can think of as a comparison was Apple Vision Pro. I mean, if you think about it, in WWDC 2023, they announced the Apple Vision Pro at the developer conference in June. A year or so later, come that next year's January, they released it. There was a lot of waiting and a lot of sort of developer kind of movement around that device. And it's been 6 months now, and we kind of have seen the sort of shaky start that it's been off to. Apple Intelligence, very similar. Now, WWDC 24 announced, and now we're waiting not only until the fall, but especially until later in the fall, and really as far as a developer platform goes, into early next year, potentially January, February, or March, or even later of 2025, very similar to Apple Vision Pro. And so this is where we start getting into sort of the touchy-feely areas of this channel in terms of feeling like, oh, I constantly talk about the importance of Apple's relationship to their developers and the complexities of apps and the importance of a robust app ecosystem and a platform for those applications. And in this case, Apple is really relying on third-party developers the same way they are for Apple Vision Pro to make sure that their platform is as robust as possible and better than all of the competition, such that the competition can't catch up. Now, whether that's going to be the case is still to be seen, especially because the platform isn't even finished yet. One of the reasons I wanted to install the device, even though it's on this production device of mine, is because ultimately, for me, I am a developer at heart. I went to school for computer science, right? But as I look through these things, as I look through the writing section of this, none of those are really things I can use as a developer. When I look through the images section, none of those are things I can really use as a developer. And when I look at the Siri section, the product knowledge, the richer language support, the better context support, the better look, and the better double tap are nothing that I can build on right now. So none of the features that have come out have really been oriented towards that developer group that are going to have to be the best and first adopters of the most important part of the technology that Apple is releasing here. And whether or not Apple will have great success with that is still to be seen. Let me temper all of that grandiose language with one final thought, which is that when I look at this, the richer language support, the context support, the look, the double tap, the product knowledge, the summaries, the key points, tables, lists, notifications, focus, priorities, transcriptions, search, memory movies, and things like that, just the features that they have shipped so far, it's already a pretty robust release. And any other year, I think that we would have been ecstatic to see this much change happening in iOS and across Apple's platforms as a whole. So let's temper it with a little bit of reality that all things considered, we're pretty lucky to see these features come out, and especially right now. I think any one of them is going to be very helpful to a lot of people to ultimately millions of users that use these Apple devices across the globe. And whether or not the broader platform play happens is sort of gravy on top of that, even if it is the battle that I think matters the most. So let me know if you've gotten Apple Intelligence installed and maybe had a little bit more luck than me. I love hearing your opinions about the things that the technology that you're using. And it's been a little bit, so sorry about not posting for a while for those who are longtime viewers of the channel. And I'm excited to get there in the comment section and kind of chat away with you after a while. I'll keep kind of plugging away at these. I've got a lot more thoughts about Apple Intelligence and 6 months of Apple Vision Pro coming up soon, so make sure you subscribe. And I will be back later this week with another video, and I'm excited to talk to you then. Thanks for watching.